Can't complain.
Here's my Cinco de Mayo. Homemade little margarita and did some tacos tonight.
It's the 8th, Chris. It's the 8th. What? What day is it?
Wait, isn't Cinco 8?
I've been asleep since then. I don't know.
Didn't we ever talk about numbers?
Yeah. He celebrates Ocho Mayo.
Ocho Mayo. Oh my God, I got it wrong again.
Not again.
Go back and watch the lecture again.
All right. I hope everybody had a great 4th. I hope everybody had a better 5th. Yeah, well, May the 4th be with you was this.
And also with you.
Always.
Yeah, and of course, Cinco de Mayo, which we really didn't. Everybody has Mexican food, but you don't really celebrate the way you normally do. There was a Buddhist holiday as well that we just glossed over as the United States, and it has. What's that?
There's no drinking involved.
There isn't. Yeah.
I like Kevin's idea. Sorry.
No, it's fine. So we had a lot of different things that happened over the past week. Everybody's looking forward to perhaps the state opening up on the 16th. The governor is still, counting on his fingers and toes as to what's going on, and allegedly will let us know.
Cinco 8. Yeah.
I want to remind everybody, as I start to mute everybody, that all of these things that we're talking about tonight are not in a tiled lodge. This will be recorded for future use on social media purposes, and for education for other lodges as well. If you do have a question while we're discussing this, or you want to speak out about a particular topic, you can either raise a hand, which is easy to do, down on the bottom of your bar under the reactions button, or you can type in the chat and we can go from there. I have it set so that I can see if you raise your hand on the software. If you raise your hand in the window, I'll figure that part out too. But if you want, thanks, Chris. So tonight's topic is geometry. And I thought a little bit about having multiple issues or multiple videos about this. And it's such a broad topic, really is, especially when you go from geometry in general to sacred geometry. When you do that, then the Masonic gamut is out there for you, and we could spend literally hours discussing that. Again, if you do have comments to weigh in on, you're more than welcome to raise a hand and or unmute yourself when we call through. With that, I'm going to start the slide share here. All right, everybody can see, right? I'm assuming. Excellent. Cool. So as always, we discuss something to research, something to read, some online resources, something to learn about, and then the open discussion at the end, discussion at the scripture at the close. Something to research, well, that'd be geometry versus sacred geometry. Geometry in general is very fantastic in terms of the authors, the contributors, all of that fun stuff, the history of geometry in general, why we call it that, what it means, and of course the branch of mathematics is discussed below there. Geometry, again, is part of the quadrivium, which we've been discussing lately. The quadrivium, of course, is the noble four, which include music, arithmetic, and some interstellar stuff we're going to be talking about later on. Geometry is numbers in space. So it talks about relations or points, lines, surfaces, solids, higher dimensional analogs, which is a great, I think I was in that band in high school. Sacred geometry is a little bit different. We're going to touch a little bit about that in just a little bit. And that's where you start bringing esotericism into the learning method of geometry, and just start discussing why it means what it means, or even clinically defining the definition of something and then applying it a totally different way than you would think. I hearkened back to our conversation last week about the difference between a numeral and the number. The numeral is the graphic representation of the quantity of the number, just like letters are graphical representations of the sounds, even though there are plenty of the word. With that, something to read, Well, the Regius Poem. And if you know the Regius Poem at all, know anything about it, it's fantastic. They also call it a manuscript. If you see that on there, it may not be called the Regius Poem when you look it up, but you can look up the Regius Poem. It's not in English; it's in like really old English, so you can. It's best to have it translated or do a side by side, which is really good. And the reason being, the first line in the darn thing discusses geometry. From that, you can also read the Harlian manuscript, which I referred to back when we were talking about a couple of other topics. And I provided the link to that Harlian manuscript back then. Interestingly enough, the Harlian manuscripts, it's plural, the one that I referenced, I'm going to reference it again, and I'll show you. But the one that I referenced before, and then there's another one. There's two different number manuscripts that reference geometry. So online resources, that's the Warden's Retreat 2020. And these are just things to Google, look up, search, what have you. Sacred geometry, you look at the images, you can literally go down the rabbit hole, as me and my friends say, for quite some time. The Pyramids of Giza with sacred geometry, that's a fantastic topic if you really want to, aliens, right? I mean, if you want to go that route. The Vitruvian Man, yeah. I do have him around here somewhere. I've got a nice big poster board size of the Vitruvian Man. My daughter giggles every time she sees it, his twig and berries. So the Vitruvian Man is very good. The golden mean and golden ratio are all geometric examples of sacred geometry. Now, something to learn about, Euclidean geometry. That is a very strange way of saying geometry, Euclidean geometry. Of course, we're referring to Euclid. We'll get into that in just a minute. The postulates, those are not ladies of the evening. The postulates are the terms that Euclid came out with to try and postulate how the rules are in terms of geometric shapes. The Masonic Roundtable has a fantastic episode 85. Whence Came You podcast has an excellent episode on that, number 278. So if you get a chance, check those out on there. Now, the Regius Poem. On to the Regius Poem. So this is what it says in the beginning here, right? Remember I told you it's not really easy to read, right? But it says, here begin the constitutions of the art of geometry according to Euclid. So a lot of people think that this is the foundation document of Freemasonry. With that, well, it kind of starts out funny if it's talking about Freemasonry first. It doesn't say Freemason in the beginning. It says geometry. Well, and it says, whoever will both read the book well and look may find written in the old book that there may be some certain things in this book you would find nowhere else, which is great. So again, the Regius Poem is fantastic. Here are the Harlian manuscripts that I was referring to earlier. The Harlian number 1942 says number fifthly. It actually says, instead of phily, it says fifthly. Geometry, and it spells it strangely, that teacheth met and measure of anything. And from thence comes Masonry. Very interesting. A lot of people say, we don't know where Freemasonry came from. We don't have a particular start date, and that's okay. But we do have a resource that tells us, at least across two different timelines, of that it came from geometry. In the Harlian manuscript number 2054, it is said, thus the craft geometry was governed there, and the worthy master Euclid gave it the name of geometry. And it's called Mozone in this land long after. So that's also a very interesting opportunity for you to go back through. And let me see this. Sorry, we have participants coming in. Going back through that Harlian manuscript and read where it says that it's called Mozone, right? In this land long after. Another part of the same manuscript is thus defined: the fifth science, geometry, and it teaches a man to met and measure of the earth and other things, which science is masonry. So very interesting. The Harlian manuscript 2054, the Harlian manuscript 1942, and the Regius Poem all coincidincally coincide about what they say. All right. Pizza, anyone? No, it's not pizza pie. It's Euclid there with a pyramid. It's a pyramid shape he had, and of course there's the Euclidean solids, but we won't get into those exactly, and just yet. We'll get into some of the two-dimensional parts of that. So that's Euclid with a rockin' beard. He must have just come out of quarantine. He's looking great. Got a little bit of suntan on him. He's blushing on his cheeks. Young man, right? All right. I think he was in ZZ Top. All right. So for more than 2,000 years, the adjective Euclidean was unnecessary. The reason being is because there was no other sort of geometry. There was no other conception of geometry. So when we say nowadays Euclidean geometry, it's kind of silly for those folks back then because there was no other kind for 2,000 years. That's a really cool fact that I found out that, when we were even learning it in high school so many years ago. The Euclidean, we called it Euclidean geometry, and I guess the reason is because there's different flavors now, but that's not necessary. And of course, you can see all these folks here seeing what Euclid's doing, and of course, he has a pair of compasses in his hand. It's not a compass; it's compasses. It's plural, and of course, these people ain't paying attention, and this guy's over here drawing, I guess, the cleavage from one of these women bending over. All right. So here's another great example. It's a mathematical system attributed to Alexandrian Greek mathematician Euclid, describes in his textbooks in geometry. They're called the elements, right? And the interesting thing about the elements, that's the book where he actually talks about the theorems or propositions that he goes through. He was the first guy to show how the propositions could fit into comprehensive deductive and logical systems, and the elements begins with plane geometry, Plane, not Plain, right? And we call these formal proofs. Interestingly enough, we say when we try things, we try, how will you be tried? That kind of stuff in our esoteric work. Basically, you're proving yourself, right? So we're going to talk about that phraseology a little bit later too. But and here's another part of this definition that I liked. We use some of these elements in what are called algebra to be able to write them shorthand, but they called it geometric language, right? Geometrical language, which I think is very apropos. The postulates, right? The postulates are fantastic. They're very good to go back over if you don't remember them. And they're 5 postulates, and we'll get into the other ones. We call them postulates and theorems in high school. They call them something different. We'll get into that in a second too. First postulate: draw a straight line from any point to any point. Okay, so basically the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and you can draw a straight line from any point to any point. To extend that straight line continuously in a straight line, that's you keep going, right? Lines continue. You can describe a circle with any center and distance. So circles always have a center and a distance to the radius, right? That's from the midpoint to the outside. That all right angles are equal to one another, right? And it's not like Animal Farm triangles. Some aren't more equal than others. All right angles are equal to one another. That's a very interesting postulate, and we'll talk about how important that is and what we do in just a little bit. And then the parallel postulate, that's his least favorite postulate. It actually was technically not proven to be so, but basically it's if a straight line's falling on 2 straight lines and make interior angles, those are the inside angles, it's the same side less than the 2 right angles on the other sides. So there are some shapes where that doesn't actually apply, and it was basically a phrasing issue for him. The notions, instead of theorems, he called them notions back then. So the elements also includes the 5 common notions, which are the theorems, if you think about it in terms of the way you may have learned it in high school. So things that are equal to the same thing are also equal to one another. Right? That's a cool notion if you think about it. I'm going to read that one again for the kids in the back. Things that are equal to the same thing are also equal to one another. especially in terms of equality when we talk about people and other things. We're not just talking about that. Of course, we're talking about shapes here with Euclid, but that's a great concept. Is if you're equal to one thing, then if I'm equal to Brother Martin, and Brother Martin's equal to me, and we're both Masons, and all Masons are equal, then Brother Martin and Brother Chris are equal too. Okay? It's being able to apply that. If equals are added to equals, then the wholes are equal, basically the property of equality. And again, the subtractive property of equality. The fourth one is things that coincide with one another are equal to one another with reflexive properties. Basically, that if you're inside of one or the other, then what's inside on both, what's inside on one side is what's inside on the other. And then the last one is one of my favorites. It's the whole is greater than the part. If it's not, then it's not the whole, right? Interesting concept there. Go ahead, Chris.
But interesting enough, last slide you were talking about a bunch of different principles.
Yeah, I'll go back.
Interesting enough, because we talked about that last week ad nauseum with relation to different frames of reference, if you will. A lot of that, especially when it came down to the actual engineering understanding, or initially, we're talking a two-dimensional plane. Now, that's neither here nor there, but in the construct of actual geometry, it's quite interesting that in a two-dimensional plane, right angles are equal, and these things are equal. Now, this gets into the higher level principle, but masonry later, when you understand that there's multiple dimensions, but just a fun observation, because we were talking extensively last week about lines and points and references and things that define those things. So
yeah, did you get a chance to check out that video I sent you?
Yes, I did.
We'll discuss that off this list too. It's very good. It's a theoretical physicist by the name of Nassim Haramein that I sent over to Chris, and I posted it in the Facebook group as well.
It was one of the greatest arguments I've seen about the whole how do you geometrically prove the Earth is not flat? Take two right angles and prove that they actually meet at a point in space at the tertiary. That proves, yeah, there you go. So something that's fun, and when you ever meet a flat earther that really goes into that, and you're like, cool, man, draw me a right angle. Cool, and draw me a second. Well, it turns out they actually meet in a point in space, so proven. I'll shut up.
I'm just wondering what the name of the turtle is on the back that we're riding on, right? So back to the notions. The whole is greater than the part. That's where we left off there. So here's a couple of visual representations. And this is, guys, you kind of have to give me a break a little bit on this one, because there's no way I can include all of the visual representations of all the mathematical concepts that we'll be discussing tonight in terms of geometry. But I'll do my best. The triangle, the angle sum theory states that the sum of the three angles of any triangle, in this case, angles A, beta, and whatever that is. I can't tell if it's a Y or what it is, but all is equal 180 degrees. So basically all the inner angles of a triangle equal 180 degrees. The Pythagorean theorem, which is one of Freemasonry's favorites, states that the sum of the areas of two squares on the legs A and B of a right triangle equals the area of the square on the hypotenuse, or C, right? And this one's kicked on its side, which is funny. And then Thales' theorem. Thales' theorem I thoroughly enjoy, and the reason being is, well, it's actually kind of biblical for me, and I'll go into that later too. Thales' theorem states that if A and C is the diameter, basically this point and this point, or you bisect a circle or sphere, then the angle at B or any other point on the perimeter, the angle at B is always going to be a right angle. So basically, if you bisect a circle or a sphere and you determine a point anywhere on the perimeter or the exterior of that circle or sphere, then you are going to create a right angle from that point. But you need to be able to know where the middle of that point is, and you also need to be able to, bisect it and have the third point. So you don't just need the middle, you need the middle and two other points. All right. So the Pythagorean theorem is very similar to what we were just talking about in terms of Thales' theorem, in terms of the 90-degree angle. With that, the Pythagorean theorem, the 47th proposition of Euclid, we call it the Pythagorean theorem instead of the 47th problem. And we just talked about that. It's a symbol associated with us, There's a little point dwelling in the history of all of where it came from and how much study there's been going on about it. They didn't really call it that. They were using algebra to talk about it. But the 47th proposition is a very, very Freemasonic emblem. And in other jurisdictions, I've seen where past masters' jewels are the 47th proposition, or they say the 47th problem, but it's the 47th proposition or the Pythagorean theorem. Okay. All right. Here's where things get interesting. The circumpunct is, of course, an ancient symbol. You can go phallic with it and say that there's a phallus in the center, and you have a obelisk like we have at the Washington Monument. You can say that it is not just a phallus. You can say that it's God retracting himself for us to exist. In terms of what that symbol represents, whether it's the sun, whether it's deity, whatever you think that that represents, geometrically, it's the center of a circle. Now, with that, we can take that center of the circle and create what's called the Vesica Pisces. And this is old hat for a lot of folks in terms of sacred geometry. But the Vesica Pisces, which is what you see here on the bottom right-hand side, that is how you can draw that 180-degree isosceles triangle. We can draw several other sacred geometrical shapes out of there. Of course, A and B being the 2 points. And I'll give you one for free. Right now, what you're seeing on the Vesica Pisces is the honeycomb, right, for the beehive, right? On the very top here, this little, it looks almost like a bishop's mitre, right? It's the top. It's this particular archway, hint, hint, to all those other guys. So that archway, of course, is drawn when two circles come together. Some people say this represents, the circumpunct represents a singular mason. And when two masons come together, then they create that sacred Vesica Pisces in here. You turn it on its side, and of course, you get the ictus, or the ichthus, the fish, that was used by one of the great Christian masters, right? Jesus. So you can see that there. You can continue to do this, and it becomes then from the seed of life to the flower of life to the tree of life. You can go all the way, and that's Kabbalistically speaking, not geometrically speaking. Mike, is that sounding better at all?
Hey, Troy, you're breaking up big time, buddy.
Hold on. I will see to this.
Must be that fancy screen you got on your microphone.
Right, probably.
Just kidding.
Hold on. How's that?
Hey, we got you back.
All right.
Sounds good.
Good. All right. We'll continue. There we are. All right. So we were talking about the Vesica Pisces. We were talking about how the Vesica Pisces is a great symbol for Christianity and Freemasonry as well. The 2 points in the center coincide and create the Vesica Pisces there with the equilateral triangle on the top. With that, what I was saying earlier is that two circumpuncts together then create that symbol across the top, which is the beehive symbol, which you can see in our monitor and in our degree work. You can continue on with this and create the flower of life and the tree of life, but it's a great example of the geometry in action. Here is a great example of that Vesica Pisces that I just showed you, right? 2 points. If you put a point here and a point here, that creates that archway there through the Vesica Pisces, and that is a archway at the cathedral at Chartres, right? Chartres, if you want to in French. In terms of what's carved in there, I didn't go through and check all the images there, but the 2 points, that's definitely that archway there. That's why we can have load-bearing arches. Okay. Here's another great example of using Thales' theorem. The point within the circle can also allow us to create the phi ratio, the little zero with the slash through it there. Phi, however you want to say it. That can actually be created, that ratio or that spiral coming out of there can be created with 2 circles or 2 circumpuncts, if you will, with one point being G, the other point being O, and being able to rotate that on the angle here between the two. Okay. Two equal circles arranged around the points O and G. The right angled triangles formed around H, I, and J, which is here. Boop, boop, and boop. Here's a great example of Thales' theorem. It looks really messy this way. It's a lot of algebraic talk, but I like looking at it like this. Very simple. Thales' theorem says that when you put a distinct point on the circle, when you have the diameter, then you can actually get the angle of A, B, and C being the right angle. Okay. Now, before we go to the open discussion, I do want to stop the share here. I want to talk to you guys about the degree, and I'm going to have to guard what I say quite carefully. The degrees tell us that we have something that is lost. We know that part, right? We're searching for something that's lost. There's a couple of different ways to find a right angle, but here's the kind of homework I want you to think about between the time now and when we meet again. In all of the biblical texts and in all of the Egyptian artwork that you've ever seen, have you ever seen a square? No. I've never heard them call it that. I've never seen a square. Now, we've seen compasses and stuff like that from that time. I mean, 2 sticks, right? 2 sticks with twine on the top. You can do compasses, you can get circles. But in terms of being able to pull off a 90-degree square, make things true, right? To have your walls of your cathedral or your church or your tabernacle or your synagogue properly go east and west and north and south. And of course, we know, and this isn't a piece of esoteric knowledge, we put entered apprentices in the northeast corner. We put cornerstones in the northeast corner. So putting them there is a foundational step. We talk about that and we talk about why. But how do we know that that square stone is square at 90 degrees? There's a fan theory. Go ahead, Harry. I see your hand up. Yeah.
Hairless. Thank you. Oh, Harry.
Doesn't it have to involve with the plumb line? Because the plumb line actually directs a straight line, creating a parallel line in the bottom, creating a 90-degree angle, and repeating it at opposite, it creates your square.
All right, geometrically now I'm going to ask, how do you know that the bottom is parallel?
Well, no, I don't know.
I'll take a swing.
Well, just one second, just to further Brother Bermudez's point here. The plumb line is used to prove horizontals.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Okay, so go ahead, Chris.
So this is an interesting thing, and I'm also going to be careful about how I say it as well. What is the base of a pyramid called?
A base.
The base, yeah. I mean, but I'm actually getting after. I mean, I'm using the word that I'm trying to describe. What is the shape that makes the base of a pyramid?
Square.
An actual pyramid. It's a square.
Yeah.
Well, if you take a plumb line in a pyramid, what point does that accurately depict in a perfect pyramid the actual center of the square.
It'd be the center of the square.
Yes, sir. So plumb lines in any three-dimensional shape will depict the epicenter. I think I got the word right. Been a while since I really reached back into that one. But the epicenter of any 4-point object, no matter rectangular, square, however, it'll always depict in a three-dimensional plane, if you use a fifth point, the epicenter.
Yeah, and a great example of that is some of the ancient churches, right? They used to actually hang a metal plumb line, and there was actually a mark in the stone that made a cross, right, where it was rubbing. Yeah.
Got it.
But again, you got to get to that pinnacle to hang the darn thing to find the center, right? So the noggin scratcher that I'm giving you is, with only knowing that they had cubits, we know they had cubits, straight sticks. How are they able to prove 90-degree angles? Well, there's one way of having a square, right? That's one way. The other way is by the 3-4-5 triangle, right? We saw an example of that in the video, in the image that I had before, where basically if you have something, three of whatever, whether it's centimeters, meters, miles, doesn't matter. And you have whatever that 3 of that is, you have 4 of them, and then you have 5. If you connect all 3 of those, like with a rope, if you will, or a straight line, then you will create a 90-degree angle in that shape, right? And that's very difficult, but that's, interestingly enough, we have 2 descriptors of an angle of 90 degrees, right? So we call it an angle of 90 degrees or a fourth of a circle, right? Very interesting that we use that. And I'll ask this esoteric question with no answer. You don't have to answer. How will you be tried? Yeah, okay. So we take a very symbolic method of teaching, an esoteric form of teaching. Again, these guys were not Rhodes Scholars, right? No offense to the builders, but they weren't. They did not go to classical schools. They were tradesmen. So they were taught esoteric knowledge to be able to apply real world geometric math. Go ahead, Brother Ardwan. Hold on, let me unmute you. Go ahead.
It can also be any multiples of those numbers. It could
That's
be
correct.
3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10. And the distance of the hypotenuse has to be 10 in that particular situation. So that you test the square of a building in that fashion.
That's correct. And that's a ratio, right? The 3
Correct.
to the 4 to the 5.
Yes.
I made allusion to the base of a three-dimensional object for that reason. You bring up a wonderful point. The multiples. I almost said multiples. Good English, Chris. Multiples. But I guess we find the base numbers to be the way they are because they're the base numbers for what you're saying, which is a great point. I mean, everything starts with a base. Last week we were talking about base 8, base, different number systems. But when you go to the root base, it's an interesting premise because it's the starting form of which we build off of. And you bring a great point. That's how you build something bigger. And engineers use that. We use that through history. That's a perfect explanation.
Yeah.
Well, and I read a great paper this week that was discussing that exact topic. And the way he put it was, what if what we were given to a certain 2 guys, basically one had one side of it, one had another side of it in our degree, and one of them died, then holy crap, we could no longer prove angles of 90 degrees because one of them had one side of it and one of them had the other side of it. And we were unable to prove the angles of 90 degrees, so we were no longer able to truly build. However, there was a substitute way of finding out that angle of 90 degrees. A very true classical mathematical way, not esoterically, but in truth, with the 3, 4, 5 ratio. Another way to prove them. So, very interesting concept. The substitute way It was given to us. So not only is it esoteric, but it's very geometric, right? It's a practical sense of having another way to prove an angle of 90 degrees.
I would even further what you're saying, Troy, and what was said before about building on things, because inherently we don't. There's, man, I'm trying to think if there's any reference to points or lines when it comes to stuff for us. I'm not trying to say anything either, but I'm also trying to think if there's anything or mention of points or lines in our esoteric or whatever else. I always think that the whole shape of 3 is great because without one, everyone else fails. So it takes an act of brotherhood for it to even function as a base.
Exactly right, and that's the other cool thing that I enjoy about Thales' theorem. In Scripture, we read where 2 or 3 are gathered and together, and so literally you can't prove jack by yourself. It's kind of neat where you have to have another brother with you to be able to get with a third point that 90-degree angle, if you will, the true square. So with that,
it's a wonderful premise because it just instills that you can't do anything by yourself.
Yeah, well, you can, but it may not be true.
It's fruitful, or you won't build the base upon which we erect everything we do.
Can a Mason try himself?
No. I mean, that just sounds like you're jerking off in the corner, though.
Right? Well, you never lose an argument, but right? So with that, I just want to open it up for discussion. Again, it's a very tiptoe primer into sacred geometry and geometry in general. I didn't want to waste a lot of time on things that you guys could research on your own. Math and geometry are something that I take, that I enjoy taking a piece of graph paper and drawing it out myself. I enjoy doing that because it helps me see and feel what it looks like when I do that. And I get the relationships a lot better when I do that. For you guys, it may be different. There's 3 different learning styles that I've come across in terms of learners, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes there. So, great question, Brother Paul. Can a single Mason create a Supreme Council? I think it's more like a country, right? Can he create it? I don't think he can create it. He can create it, is that correct? But can he keep it?
I mean,
keep it is a separate thing. A single SGIG can create a Supreme Council in an unoccupied area. But yeah.
So he creates an Orient, right? Or whatever it is.
He can create a Supreme Council, then he can create 33rds, and then they establish the Supreme Council. But yes, that's how many of the Supreme Councils were created.
But didn't it take a certain acknowledgement from other established, or is this? I'm ignorant on that actual fact. I'm just curious. I thought it took an acknowledgement.
Recognition is a different thing.
Maybe I was getting those two wrong. So,
Southern jurisdiction was created by 1/32nd, who became a 33rd. But that's another whole story.
Yeah, that's
into the whole like how it came to be in the United States, right? Like,
right.
Yeah,
came to be in the world.
Yeah. I like that conversation. That's a very interesting conversation, which I don't know enough about. I'd love to learn more about that.
Brother Paul wrote a great book on that, actually. And there's a couple others about Freemasonry in Louisiana. But the irony is, how did he become a 32nd? It wasn't by himself.
Who?
Oh, well, the SGIG, right? Was it a proclamation where he proclaimed himself an SGIG?
Who were we talking about?
Well, in terms of any Mason that can create a valley or an Orient, right?
The old theory was that, and you can't do this anymore because the old 25-degree system is gone. But the old theory was if you held the 25th degree in that old system, and this is how both Mitchell and Cerno were explained, if you held that degree, you slid over to the 32nd degree. And if you were a 32nd degree alone or senior in an unoccupied area, you became a 33rd with the right to establish a Supreme Council and create other 33rds. But that provision no longer exists, and that's just history.
Out of
Okay.
curiosity with the history, and this is just, again, pure curiosity because I should know better, but when was the actual, like, last time that happened? When was the last time that you had an establishment of a Supreme Council out of something like that?
I don't know. It very well may have happened in Europe, South America. Didn't happen in the United States, except in very early days, but it could very well have happened elsewhere. And it probably did.
That's cool. I think that's really cool.
But the point was that in certain cases, you can have one. But the interesting aspect is it wasn't three. However, in order to create the Supreme Council, he had to be a 33rd. So there's an interesting aspect there too from the numbers.
Well, and that goes back to, well, why are the degrees numbered the way they are? Why, which jurisdiction has those numbers and which ones don't? Why do the numbers not match up with the names of the degrees? And again, in terms of researching Freemasonry for the first 3 degrees, in terms of geometry, those degrees aren't the degrees you guys got. The Noah styled degrees actually dealt with geometry before we actually have these particular sets of degrees. So the theme of geometry far exceeds the current system of degrees that we have now. So much so that allegedly, like I said, the followers of Euclid really had a degree-styled structure where they had to go through certain trials and tribulations before he would even recognize them as human beings, much less teach them anything. So very interesting concept in terms of teaching. Brother Adwan.
Troy, I'd like to backtrack a little bit on that 3, 4, 5 and look at it as the ratio of us as Masons being in direct ratio to each other, 3, 4, 5, and by that fact, we help each other stay square. And then the fact that if we do that in that fashion with those numbers, or even the multiples of those numbers, how great the organization could be if we all work toward keeping that ratio in balance the way it should be, to be square, so that we can square our building that we have in our hearts.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the esoteric way of looking at the numbers and the geometry, right? I'll never forget Brother H. Edward Durham talking to me about his father, and how when he was talking about Freemasonry and talking about his ring, he would show him a symbol and then tell him what it meant, not what it, not the esoteric work, but what it meant in real life and how to apply it. This is a plumb, and that means that, just like God reaches down to me, I need to make sure that my line of communication with God is always open, that kind of thing, right? Very straightforward, practical, usable Freemasonry. And I thank you for highlighting that, Brother Nelson. So have you guys had aha moments when you're seeing geometric? I'm weird. You guys know.
What?
Right? Shocker. When I went out after my first degree, I saw the world differently. When I went out after my fellowcraft degree, I definitely saw the world differently. And after my Master Mason degree, I can see the world no other way, right? So I see structures, shapes, sacred geometry all over the place now. Can you guys maybe recount for me where you've seen sacred geometry that you're like, oh, it's been there the whole time and I just now saw it?
Don't make me talk more, guys, because I'll give a story, but so someone else please give a story.
Churches, definitely. I mean, especially obviously Renaissance Gothic cathedrals, but churches in general. And that's not just churches, synagogues also, you know, in reality, any temple, whether it be Hindu or Qurans, they're all going to have some type of a certain amount of sacred geometry involved in them. I mean, I guess you'd call that sacred architecture maybe more than geometry, but I guess maybe one's an evolution of the other. You know, sacred architecture is a natural evolution of sacred geometry.
I'll say that I brought up the whole base and idea of the three-dimensional shape because I was only raised, good Lord, 2-3 years ago. I'm not exactly that old as a Master Mason, but I did a lot with geometry and engineering before I even became a Freemason. So even back when I first saw cathedrals, and being a Catholic, you know, my background is Catholicism, but to me, it was always interesting that the steeple typically would try to be positioned over the geometric position of the altar because a plumb line would define, and Brother Troy brought this up, and I think a few others did as well, but that plumb line would inscribe where the holy altar was formed on the cross and the whole way that the church was set up in some of the greater cathedrals of olden times. So again, the plumb line thing was always interesting because, again, kind of go back to the whole three-dimensional sphere in space, that you could literally inscribe the cross on the base of the structure because that's where it was defined to be the epicenter and the holy point. Just before I was a Freemason, I saw that already and was like, oh, that's cool. And then the understanding later was like, oh, mind blown.
Troy, I noticed we had recently taken a trip to France last year, and while standing under the Eiffel Tower, looking at all the structural iron and the curved surfaces and the right triangles that were shown in the structural iron of that building, made me think back and everything, because there's strength in the arch and there's strength in the triangle. And I noticed that, and I reflected upon it because we were there for, a couple of hours, just looking at it and thinking about it to myself, saying, I wonder if the guys that designed this tower were aware of the amount of masonry that is evident in it. And as we walked around Paris, it seemed as I saw more Masonic symbolism, so to speak, in shapes and figures than I was really prepared to see. But it was amazing to be able to see that. And it made me look at things maybe in a little bit clearer face.
You can thank Brother Gustav for that. Brother Gustav Eiffel. He sure as heck was a brother and was a Mason. And a matter of fact, the company that made that tower made the radio tower here in Shreveport, the one that looks like an Eiffel Tower, because it is an Eiffel Tower. It's not the, but it's a. And if you ever want to go check that place out, you can drive by it and see the superstructure underneath, and then it comes up to the point, and there's a little coin on the top of the darn thing too. Yeah. Kind of neat. We use it for radio broadcasting now, as the original was as well. But there's no elevator in this one.
Interesting point. Gothic architecture. What was a big thing in Gothic architecture? The whole flying buttress. What's a flying buttress?
Triangle.
Yeah. If you cut out the curve, I was about to, I guess you guys beat me to it. I was gonna say, what's the load-bearing point on a flying buttress? It's actually the actual top of the curve. So if you draw the points, it actually turns out to be a triangle. We just have the materials to do that back in the day. So that curve, still the lowest point on that curve is still the load-bearing epicenter.
Absolutely.
The triangle. You guys
Absolutely.
got that one.
Absolutely.
You already got that one down, right? Perfect.
It's funny you're mentioning France, because if you look at the streets of DC and the streets of Paris, just from a bird's eye view, you can see a lot of the same
Yeah.
crisscross symbol, the same type of Pierre L'Enfant designed the streets of DC decades before the modern streets of Paris as we know them have been laid out. But they, it's very similar with the angles and the squares, and even a pentagram or two here and there. So they're pretty similar if you look at them just from a bird's eye view.
Yes, they are. Yes.
I'm trying to find this picture. I very blessed to get to do what I do. I got a really good picture of DC that I had never seen before. When I was flying into it, this is a couple months ago, but I never really appreciated the architecture and the structural layout of DC until I saw it from this angle and actually got to see like the actual architectural design of DC from the air. I mean, you see it in that context, and you see how things were designed in grids and the angles and everything else. That's when you go, oh, this is very reminiscent of actual Gothic architecture, and it's gorgeous. If you can, when you really appreciate it. Sure, Troy. Is there a way I can share a picture with you, Troy, to share with the group here?
I'm looking at something right now.
Oh, yeah, we pulled it up. I'm sitting here.
The subway lines of DC. What?
Well, yeah. Oh, I'm the host now. Oh God, Troy, I wouldn't want to do that if I were you.
Well, I'll snatch it back if you start acting funny.
Well,
After that,
you know me, brother. Come on now. I'm just trying to look how I can. Hold on, I gotta find a way to pull the picture of my computer, and I can do it.
yeah, if you put that next to Paris, it's a very similar layout to the Parisian streets.
Hold on, I gotta find a way, Troy, to get this. Son of a gun! I've never done this before, man. You're putting me on the spot.
Pull up, pull up. No, I'm just kidding.
Pull out. That's what she said.
So there's a great example.
I'm gonna share my screen. Can I do this?
Go ahead, share screen. You need to?
I'm gonna try.
Yeah, hit it. Hold on. There you go. He can be taught. Congratulations.
Wow. Not well, but so this picture was taken at 10,000 feet on arrival into DCA. Can you see my mouse?
Yeah.
Perfect. So over there's DCA Airport. That's actually
Reagan National.
There you go. There's the monument. There's the White House. RFK is down here. But when you actually look at the grid, I mean, and you look at the actual layout of the entire city, there's not many that are reminiscent like that of true European design. I mean, it was a magnificent architectural feat. And when you look at all the different points, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you see a little bit of 4 here going on, but still you see that you talk about angles and stuff. I mean, it's all over. It's prevalent. It's prevalent everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a beautifully designed, town. Too bad for the, everything that's going on, but whatever. But yeah, the actual design itself is just gorgeous.
Now, you and I both know that they've always said it doesn't matter how the city's laid out. It's not Masonic. It's just if you lay lines together, they're going to make cross points.
Okay, still.
Yeah.
It is a thing of beauty. I'm just saying that.
So with that, has anyone else seen that sacred geometry? I saw it in things like pineapples and pine cones and sunflowers and yes, architecture. But I mean, I saw it in pinwheels and train tracks and everything else too.
Yeah, I mean, it's called the golden ratio for a reason. You look at obviously the most famous is going to be the Nautilus shell that goes out logarithmically like the Fibonacci sequence, because it grows at a certain ratio. But you think about like a rattlesnakes, you know, rattle, all kinds of things like that, where you can see the geometry in nature. So I guess any natural geometry may you want to call sacred, you know, because it's probably something to do with phi somewhere along the line. The most beautiful number.
My seventh grade art teacher taught us about the golden ratio. It was used, if you look at Da Vinci's ratio, when he lays out the human body, he's using the golden ratio.
Again, circle inscription when it comes down to triangles and everything else, what you're saying with the human body, and it's an amazing understanding of the actual human form when it comes to that, which is amazing about that you can actually relate the human body to geometry, right? And so I think that's almost a perfect example of actually what we're talking about when it comes to the human nature and design and geometry in this universe. Maybe I'm a little cuckoo on that one, but I mean, it is. I mean, Michelangelo when he did that was,
There you go.
pretty amazing.
There we go.
Yay!
Vitruvian Man, yeah. So Vitruvius was an architect. I'm sorry, Vitruvian. What's his name? Vitruvius or Vitruvian? It's Vitruvian Man, but I can't remember his actual name. I mean, it's Da Vinci.
Yeah, Vitruvius was his street name.
Okay.
No, you're right. You're right.
Say somebody to do with ancient Rome.
That's how he made his money on the street corner.
Right. Now, I'll tell you, interestingly enough, about the hand, right? Same thing, right? This section, then these sections going up. The hand is divided into those same sections. Very interesting, and Da Vinci shows that in his little notebooks that he took.
Everyone's looking at our hands now, and you're kind of like, it's one of those
Right.
jokes in high school. You're like, did you know if your hand is as big as your face?
Right. Got me. Yeah. Well, and you know, the cubit and all that other fun stuff comes from the proportions of the human body. By no coincidence.
Cubit?
The cubit.
Oh, the denomination, right?
Yeah, the royal cubit, the Egyptian cubit, the pharaoh's cubit, however you want to describe it, those came from proportions of the human body too. And there's several references to the human body in the craft. Several. Certain parts, right?
Okay, I missed that part about the cubit then.
Well, well, when it measures the ark of both Noah's ark and the Ark of the Covenant in our Holy Scripture, it does line it out in terms of cubits, right? And the pillars. So both pillars are also measured in cubits. And they say that the volutes, is it flutes or volutes? I can't remember, is a hand's breadth
Yes.
between them. And now I always wonder if is it this away or is it this away, you know? But it doesn't stipulate. You would think it would be up,
Hands.
right? So unknown which way it is, but I think it's the flutes in the column are a hand's breadth in width. Interestingly enough, the Christ talked a lot about direction and measurement. He talked about the cardinal directions and also measurements as well. He mentioned a lot of numbers and a lot of geometry, if you want to go back through and read some of that. He talked about, how far is east from west and that kind of stuff. It was very interesting when he talks about distance and measuring things within three different vectors, if you will. We have length, width, and height. Well, one of my favorites my dad taught me is that you have to have three things in order to meet somebody else: where they're going to be, when they're going to be, and who it's going to be when you get there. So interestingly enough, Christ covers all three of those to be able to find somebody else in three-dimensional space. Who you're going to meet, when you're going to meet, and where you're going to meet. Very interesting.
Drug trade might teach you differently. It might just be where and what. The who might be a unknown.
Right? You never know.
I had a quick question for Scott. What truck do you have in your background there, sir? Because I'm curious about this.
That's a C10. That's a
That is a C10. It's a 73 through 80 model body style. I own two. That's just my background. I got a 79 shore base, kind of like that right there, and I've got a 78 GMC Jimmy, which is a Blazer in all instances.
Didn't mean to go off topic. I'm curious.
So-
I'm like, I like the blue on that truck. That's good.
yeah, C10.
Nice.
Sorry, Troy, might be divulging a little bit here after Lodge, but I was like, man, that's a good color.
No, that's
Yeah,
all
I
right.
like it. I like it.
Does any other brother have anything about the geometry? If not, then we'll just kind of check in on each other and catch up. Has anybody checked on any brothers that haven't been to Lodge lately? Anybody that maybe one of those high-risk population folks?
I have, but it should have been a couple of people.
How they doing?
Oh, they're doing good. They're getting out more than I am. They're wearing masks and using wipes, and they're just continuing life on like as if nothing has happened.
I'll tell you, with the storms that came through, with the hail last week and everything else this week, it was very difficult to keep up with everybody and to see what's fallen and what's not and what's going on. I'm hearing somebody's TV. If you could mute that while we're doing this part.
That would be me.
Oh, sorry, Scott. Thanks.
I was watching Ancient Aliens.
Yeah, right.
You had this on mute. You had this on mute so I could listen to you and the TV at the same time. And when someone asked me a question, I unmuted. I forgot that I had the TV on.
Fair enough.
Chariots of the gods.
Go ahead, Brother Martin.
Love conspiracy theories.
Troy, last night I was on a go to meeting with the Valley of Monroe, and they said that Mitch Reynolds is home doing well. He's still doing his PT because his voice hasn't come back 100% from being on a ventilator for so long. Also, I heard that excuse me, Brother Marvin Davis is in the hospital with double pneumonia. So please,
the last account I had on him, he was doing pretty good.
okay. Well, last night the only thing they said was that he was in the hospital with double pneumonia, so we hadn't gotten an update on him.
Does any other brother have any reports on anybody? I know that certain districts were hit harder than others.
So I haven't been to again, obviously, hi. I live down here in Texas now. I haven't been to Lodge down here in Texas in months, but there are a lot of older brothers down here, especially in the Houston area. Jockey Malay is Lodge 1390 in Houston, who I affiliate with down here when I dual lodge. But it's been a long time since I've been there. I still keep up with those brothers pretty well. There's still a very good open invitation, by the way. I know when I first got down here, Troy, I think I talked to you. I talked to Brother Gerard, Brother Fuller, some more guys from mostly the Scottish Rite. But there is an open invitation still for any brother up in the Shreveport area that wants to come down when things really do reopen to see like the Texas side of things. I was raised obviously with you guys, but so the whole Texas Freemasonry thing is a little interesting. I'm pretty worthless to them because I do too much. I fall back to learning what I did with everyone back up there, which is always fun. But it's fun to see the stuff down here. But there's a lot of older brothers down here in Houston. So just in general, if you could just say a general prayer for older brothers everywhere, that's a good thing. I get a lot more emails, I think, down here about brothers that aren't doing well, because there's a pretty wide base, and we have some very fine older folk. It's good to see the brothers checking up on everyone in every district. That's a very good thing.
Chris, I think you may have gotten it. I don't know if you got the letter from your Grand Master, but I think he's going to open stuff up on the 25th of this month for y'all, with some restrictions in place. If I remember correctly, it's like everybody has to wear a mask. You have to maintain social distancing, no degree work, no meals before the meetings or after the meetings, just no kind of gathering around. So he's trying to do something to get masonry functioning back in Texas, and I hope that whatever the governor does on Monday, that our Grand Master will follow some of the same guidelines and get us up and going again here in Louisiana.
I hope so as well, sir. I did see the edict that just came out about that. It's good to see. I think one of the biggest concerns was Texas is a little bit different from Louisiana based on people have to prove their proficiency after being conferred the degree, especially Master Mason. They have to, I think, prove within 90 days down here. So there was a concern that individuals who've received the degree, and a lot of the brothers actually put in the very hard work to do it, there was going to be an issue with them. If you not trying to be cryptic, but you understand exactly what I'm saying. Like they have to recite. So that was something interesting. Big thanks to Brother Gerard back there in Shreveport when I got to recite my fellow crafts in open lodge, and that was a whole different experience than as far as Louisiana is concerned. But it was great. But we don't recite in open lodge necessarily, but they have to prove their degree work, and that's, I think, a wonderful thing. But there was a concern that the brothers were going to fall out of their window. So the edict that was extended, I think, was a wonderful, wonderful thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good.
Brothers, I will tell you, I got a chance to catch up with our Grand Master this week, just to check on him and Lady Becky, see how they were doing. I will tell you that, Brother Martin, the White House rules for Phase 1 reopening and the governor's rules for Louisiana's Phase 1 reopening differ. So we're going to see exactly what we're at that crossroads as well. In terms of small businesses, in terms of normal commerce, in terms of Freemasonry, trying to get back operational is the first step. After that, that's when you get back to where you were.
Yeah, I understand that the White House's rules for Phase 1 is gatherings of 25, no more than 25 people. I'm hoping that our governor will accept that and go along with it as well. I have some friends that are in the barber and beauty shop business, and they have been told that they can reopen on the 15th. One customer per 110 square feet of your shop. So we'll see how it goes, and I'm hoping and I'm praying that John Bell Edwards will say, yeah, you can go back, 25 people, mask required, and maintaining the six foot distance between people. If he does that, I think our lodges can start functioning again.
Your words to God's ears, Brother Martin. With that, I want to give you the scripture reading for this evening.
Real quick, Troy.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I just want to share something with Brother Martin over there, by the way. I still have something, look familiar?
Yes, it does. If you let me know if you need a couple more, I still have some left.
I keep that, so that stays in my Freemasons briefcase of stuff that I keep, under lock and key. But that still stays in my It's right there, pinned on underneath all the stuff I keep in my briefcase. So just
Well, thank you,
always,
Brother Chris.
always give me a very big smile to yeah.
I appreciate that very much. Let me tell you guys, that was a very exciting year for me and something that I never thought would ever happen to me. And I thank y'all for electing me to that position.
Well, thanks for sharing something so cool with someone so new, because yeah, I mean, I was raised that year, and it's pretty special to me. And obviously I miss you guys because it's such a very special place in my heart. All of you guys are. So thanks for letting me be a part of this. Run my mouth. Troy, thanks for letting me add to these conversations. I hope I add more than I do.
Glad to have you, Chris. And Brother Martin, I'm glad your family let us have a little bit of you that year. You know, that's one of the things we always do as Masons, is we forget about those folks that leave us behind as we leave them going out the door to do these things that pat ourselves on the back sometimes, and sometimes go to help others on the errand of another brother.
Let me tell you, my wife and I sit down and we still talk about things that we did during my year as Grand Master, because a lot of times they'll come up as history on my Facebook page. And I'll go, do you realize that a year ago tonight we were in such and such a place? And she says, yeah, I remember that. And we had a good time, and the ladies really accepted her. And so that made it even a better year.
As I talked to our Grand Master this week, I reminded him that we are making history every day that this goes on. And Brother Martin, you were making history in your year. We have to, who was it? Give me just 1 second. Brother posted about he's missing Lodge so much he even misses hearing the minutes. And I forgot who I read that about. And I remember now, but I'm not going to say his name.
So I would sit there and listen to the minutes.
He said I even miss hearing the reading of the minutes. And one of the guys commented, readings are really boring, and I hate having to hear the minutes. And I said, perhaps you should make your minutes count.
Well, our Grand Master is our secretary, and of course, he's pretty entertaining when he reads the minutes. I mean, there's not nothing unique about what there's something very unique about what he does when he gives it to us.
There's an amount of flair. If you add a little bit to the it's a stew, right? It's a gumbo. We already know the ingredients.
Right.
But if you could add a little spice to it, makes it a good gumbo.
Well, I had a conversation with our Grandmaster Wednesday, I think it was, and we were talking about reopening and getting things going and all like that. And I said talking about the thing in Texas, and I said about the social distancing and no personal contact. And he says, well, can you imagine going to a lodge for the first time and you haven't seen your brother in 3 months? How are you going to stop from hugging somebody? And I told him, I said, well, Grandmaster, I said, that's just something we're going to have to teach ourselves not to do right off the bat, is to run up and hug somebody because we haven't seen them in so long.
Talk about a new norm. And there is a certain degree, I think, of truth that comes with that. It has been interesting having a very unique view, all of this, while I'm still, and to be honest, I think Brother Troy, I've talked to you, Brother Sullivan, he's not on with us tonight, but he knows better than anyone else. I've been running around the country now for.
Yeah, he's listening. He's listening, Chris.
Is he? Oh yeah, no, he is there. That's right. I see him down there now. Well, all right, I'll text him later. But it's been interesting running around the country while it's been going on. I mean, I've flown just because of my job. I've gone up into New York, Maryland, everywhere on the East Coast, everywhere in between. I see the airport, and it's interesting. I think it's interesting seeing how different states are reacting in different ways to what's going on right now. I was in Pennsylvania on an overnight, and I was in a small town, and I was walking to pick up food from a restaurant, and I got pulled over walking to pick up food from a restaurant, and I got asked, what are you doing outside? And I was like, I'm going to pick up food. What are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to pick up food from a restaurant. Like, I'm only here for tonight. I'm sorry. Well, what do you do? I don't know. Here's my badge. Like, this was before we actually had a essential employee letter or stuff like that. And I literally had to show my airline badge before he would let me go. And I'm like, bro, like, the only way that this is getting to be an interesting interaction is because you're getting into my 6 feet, not, I don't know, whatever, you know, and you're literally telling me I can't be outside, yet you're the one getting into my 6 feet. So it's created a very new, interesting thing. I don't know if it's for the better or for the worse. It definitely is going to change a lot of things. But seeing how different states react to this, it's, I don't know, makes you wonder. Like,
Hey, Chris, when you're going to the gate, do you wear your student pilot hat?
I wear this in the cockpit. And then I wear it usually on Halloween and April Fool's Day, just to screw with people. Sometimes I wear it when I walk down the airplane after, like, if I have to go to the bathroom in flight, I'll wear it just to see if people ask me.
Look real nervous.
I still, you know, sometimes it's funny. Other times, like right now, like I don't want to screw with people. Like back in the day, it was fun because people were like, what? I'm like, oh yeah, man, it's my first time flying an airplane, and people would laugh or whatever. But like, I'm just kidding. I'm doing this for 20 years. But nowadays, yeah, I don't get away with it.
Well, thanks. Go ahead, Brother Martin.
Before you close, I have one thing I'd like to share with everybody. We did one of these Wednesday night with the Valley of New Orleans. And Brother Eddie LaBeouf and another brother are going to set up some online workshops for the Master Craftsman program. So as soon as he works out all the kinks on how to get everything going and how to share all of the slides and everything, and he sends me the connection for the Zoom meeting, I will send it to you and you can send it out to everybody. We'd like to get as many people involved in this as we can, and hopefully we can make it a success.
I concur, Brother Martin. Brother Eddie is on the education committee with me and has access to be able to post those links as well to the group. So I hope I'll be looking forward for that information from him. That's excellent. Brother Harry, I see you have a feline there. Is he interested in becoming president? No? He's
What's his name?
What's his name, Harry?
His name is Falcor.
Yes. Will Falcor ever become the Meowsterful master, or Meowsterful of the Lodge? The Meowster of the Lodge?
He is kind of the master of this damn house because he thinks he can lay wherever the hell he wants. Plus putting his ass on my phone.
Sounds like
that wouldn't be any relation to Falcor or me, huh?
No, we just named him because he looked like that little dog white dragon from the Never-Ending Story.
Yeah, oh no, it's perfect. The Meowsterful of the Lodge or something. I'm trying to find something there. I'm digging, but
he's just a lazy fat cat.
Well, I mean, you made me snort. Thanks.
Yeah. I haven't heard somebody snore one of that for a long time. It's funny. God, just.
I want to see Falcor, the Meowsterful Master of the Lodge, riding Scott's truck around. That'd be that just sounds like a perfect way to do it.
Pulls up with a student pilot hat on and says, "Get in if you want to live."
Absolutely, get in. We're gonna do Masonic stuff. Get in.
Let's do Masonic stuff. That's great. It was Brother Taylor Nuada that was commenting he wanted to hear the minutes. With that, I want to go ahead and wrap this up for this evening, brothers. I miss you. I really do. I hope we're going to have more news as soon as we do hear anything change. Whatever way you heard about this meeting, I will be posting whatever edict comes out to all of the social medias we get. And of course, you'll get it in your email through Grandview anyway. But either way, I'm going to have to try and figure out what we're going to do on Friday nights at 7 o'clock if we're going to be at Lodge. Either way, I miss you. I'm glad you made it tonight. Thank you. With that, I'm going to read scripture here from Isaiah 44:13, and I'll respectfully remove my cap. Isaiah 44:13 says, "The carpenter stretcheth out his rule. He marketh it out with a line. He fitteth it with planes, and he marketh it out with the compasses, and maketh it after the figure of a man, according to the beauty of a man, that it may remain in the house." And that is the scripture for this evening, brothers. Thank you very much. It's good to see you again. Same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow, or rather next Friday. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow would be great. Do it again.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.